Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Sotah, Daf Mem Gimel, getting to the end of the Masechet. Reminder to register for the Siyum, whether a local Siyum in your area, a bunch of Siyums happening in Israel, or come to our Zoom Siyum on Wednesday. And what else did I want to say? Forgot. Anyway, looking forward to seeing you at the Siyum. Today's stuff is sponsored by Elisha Rappaport in loving memory of her beloved sister, Razel Zucker, on her third Yurtzeit. May the neshama of Tova Razel Bat Yosef Yitzchak have an aliyah. Okay, we'll get started from the bottom of Membet. I will warn you, I will warn you, the next number of dapim are going to get very, very long. Okay, so try to keep ourselves in the time constraints. Okay, atem I atem ken. If you remember, the Mishnah said you are not like this because God goes out to war with you. You're not like the other nations that come with their big, powerful, strong gibor warrior that they think is going to win the war for them. No, you have God behind you. God goes out to war with you. What does it mean God goes out to war with you? Where do we get this from? So, kol kach lama, why is all this? Mipnei she'Hashem v'chol kinuyav munachim ba'aron. God's name and all of the nicknames of God are in the Aron, and the Aron goes out to war with the people. In a minute, we'll see how we know the Aron goes out to war with the people. How we know the Aron has the name of God in it and all the kinuyim is a bit of a question. It's not so clear where that comes from. Some people say it's alluded to in the luchot, the broken luchot are in the Aron. Most people think there were two Aronot. There was the Aron that Moshe built, that was wood. There was the Aron that Betzalel built. And when we got to the Beit HaMikdash, they put the Aron, the gold Aron, in the Beit HaMikdash, and that stayed there forever. And the Aron of Eitz of Moshe went out to war. What was in it? Perhaps the broken luchot, perhaps the names of God were in it. People say that it was something, it had something else in it. It didn't even have the broken luchot. There's a whole debate about it, although it's a little strange because in a minute we're going to see, according to the Bright, it had the luchot in it, but maybe just not everybody agrees with that Bright. Okay, anyway, we're going to leave that topic aside for right now and move on. V'chein hu omer, and this is where we see that it went out to war with them. Vayishlach otam Moshe elef lamatel tzava. We're now moving to, in the desert, there was this big battle with the Midyanites. Okay, this is, if you remember, they had that whole thing after they hired Balak. Balak hired Bil'am. He went to curse the people. When they couldn't curse the people, they brought prostitutes. And then there was the whole big showdown, and Pinchas comes and stabs Zimri and Cosby, right? He stabs Zimri, the head of Mateh Shimon, in front of everybody. And it was an act, a bit of a fanatic act, which was then approved of by the Torah, and he was given a brit shalom. But you'll see in a minute that not everybody was so thrilled with what Pinchas did, as you can imagine. Anyway, this big war then ensues, and in the war it says, "Vayishlach otam Moshe elef lamatel tzava." Moshe sent them out 1,000 for each tribe. It sounds like otam ve'et Pinchas. Okay, them and Pinchas ben Elazar Kohen. He was the son of Elazar the Kohen. And then it says, so now we're going to darshan. First, we're going to darshan otam. Otam is elu sanhedrin. This is telling you about when you go out to war. It says, go, right, who's otam? Oh, that's the Sanhedrin that went out. Pinchas is a Meshuach Milchama. Pinchas was the one in charge of the Milchama. So the Sanhedrin goes out, the Meshuach Milchama goes out, and then the continuation of that pasuk was, V'chol klei kodesh v'chatzatzot v'truah biyado. And he went out with the sanctified vessels. So what are those sanctified vessels? Klei kodesh ze Aron v'luchot shebo. This is the Aron and the luchot that were in it. So there you see that the Aron went out to work. What other klei kodesh would they have brought with them? And that's really what we needed. In the meantime, they're going to tell you also chatzatzot hatruah, which appears in that pasuk. What is that? Elu hashofarot. These are the shofarot that you remember. If you remember, you blow on them when you cry at war and things like that. Okay, now they're going to, before we get back to our topic, we're now on a tangent about Pinchas and this whole action that happened with Zimri. Okay, and when he killed Zimri, there's this section where then he's given this blessing, and it calls Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon Kohen. He's not only called by his father's name, also by his grandfather's name. So they try to understand, why does it do that? Anna, the Breita says, Lo lechinam halach Pinchas l'melchama. First of all, they want to figure out, why did Pinchas go out to war and not Elazar? Theoretically, Elazar's father should have been the one to lead, right? Generally, the head leads, and Elazar was more than Pinchas. So why did Pinchas specifically go? Ela lipara din avi imo. He went to take care, to kind of a vendetta, you could say. Okay, he wanted to fix something that happened with his father's mother. What was that? In other words, he had an axe to pick with the Midianites. Why? Well, we're going to learn that Pinchas came from Yosef. And because he was descended from Yosef on his mother's side, not on his father's side, obviously he came from Aaron, but on his mother's side, he came from Yosef. And because he came from Joseph, well, the Midyanim, right, if you assume the Midyanim were the Midyanim, there's a whole debate about how Yosef exactly got to Mitzrayim, but according to this, the Midyanim were the ones who sold him to Egypt, and therefore he wanted to be the one to lead the battle, as he was his father who was kind of, tortured by the Midyanim or ended up in Egypt because of that, so he wanted to be the one to lead. To which the Gemara asked, wait a minute, Lameimar de Pinchas mi Yosef ate? We still haven't gotten to that pasuk I mentioned before where he's miyuchas to Aaron. We're going to talk about that in another 2 minutes. Do you really want to say that Pinchas was from Yosef? How do you know he came from Yosef? V'haktiv, doesn't it say? And it seems like he came from somebody else. In other words, his mother was not from Yosef, but we're going to see in a minute, she came from Yitro's family. She wasn't even from a Jewish family. Ve'elazar ben Aharon, so Elazar, the son of Aaron, lakachlo mi benot Putiel lo liisha. He took from the daughters of Putiel to be his wife. What's Putiel? They want to darshan the name Putiel. Putiel could be from lefatem. Lefatem is to fatten up. Now, who fattened up what? Well, Yitro's family were idol worshippers, so they fattened up the animals for the idol worship, the calves. So now they say, not necessarily. Lo, mi Yosef, shepitpet b'Yitro. Putiel could be from the lashon of lepatpet, which is, if you remember, right? Yosef wavered. He thought about giving into his evil inclination. He almost slept with Esha Potiphar, right? In the end, he stops himself. So, isn't it right? So the whole question is, what is Putiel? Is Putiel a reference, right? It sounds like some thought it was a reference to Yitro. Some thought it was a reference to Yosef. So first they say it can't be from Yosef because he's from Yitro. And they say, what do you mean? Can't be from Yitro, he's from Yosef. So now they say, well, right? That was an attempt to answer it. Maybe Putiel is actually Yosef. They said, well, you can't really say it's Yosef and ignore that it was from Yitro, that he was from Yitro, because we have another source that clearly implies he came from Yitro. Now, this is when he killed Zimri and Cosby, the woman who he had slept with, right? Remember, Zimri's the head of the tribe of Shimon. He kills him, and people start getting very upset with him. Who are you to just get up and kill him, right? Stam, that's not the way we do things. We're not fanatics, right? We don't just get up and take the law into our own hands. And they started getting upset with him. And what did they say to him to basically mock him? Re'item ben putizeh, ben shepitem avi imo agalim lavodah zara, yaharog nasin Yisrael. This person who's descended from Yitro's family, from Gentiles who worshipped idols, is going to kill the head of a tribe of Israel? What kind of craziness is this? Now, where did this come from? That's why the Torah tells you Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen. They want to say, no. This person did the right thing, and he's descended from the right people, and don't start mocking him. And that's the story that the Midrash tells here, that they were all mocking him, comes from, number one, what you would expect, right? Human, right? Common sense would say it was probably a pretty obvious reaction to what he did. And number two, it deals with the problem in the pasuk, which is, why did it start mentioning Aharon here? There's no reason. We mentioned him as Pinchas ben Elazar and all sorts of other places. Why all of a sudden did they call him the son of Aharon? It must be to counter someone who is saying otherwise. In any case, what does this prove? We tried to say he came from that he came from Yosef, and that's why he led the battle against the Midyanim, who sold Yosef. He had an axe to pick with them. But now we see he was from Yitro. So how do we explain this? Well, an obvious answer is he's from both, remember? We're trying to figure out where his mother was descended from. So what do we say? It's a funny answer. It could be her father was from Yosef, but ime de ime mi Yitro. But her mother, right, the mother of his mother, was from Yitro. And ime de ime mi Yosef, if her mother's mother, meaning her maternal grandmother, was from Yosef, Avua de ime, her maternal grandfather his maternal grandfather was from Yitro. Okay, basically it sounds a little long-winded, but it just means right? His mother had two parents, and one was from Yosef, one was from Yitro. Very simple. Okay, so it's either this way or that way. Daikanami dichtiv, you can also infer that from the verse. What did the verse say? Mi benot Putiel, trei mashmesh mamina. It says from the daughters of Putiel. Why didn't it just say from the daughter of Putiel, bat Putiel? So it says benot to include both. So that's our first section today, which really was a big, long-winded tangent off of the fact that the Aron was, right, that everything was in the Aron, and the names of God were in the Aron, and they went out to battle with the people. Okay, now moving on to our next Mishnah, it's a very long Mishnah. It's going to discuss the second part of the speech. Okay, so before we start, I'm going to pull up the study guide for a minute, and I want you to look at the study guide and see here the psukim. So again, we started yesterday with the first section, where we talked a little bit about that there's two sections. Today we're going to see there's actually three. In the first section, the Kohen goes to talk to the people. This is actually it's the part that they say when they're actually at the battle. And basically, don't be scared, don't be fearful, all that, because God goes out with you to war. Then the shotrim, so that's Nigasha Kohen v'diber la'am. The Kohen comes and speaks to the people. You can see I color-coded, that's in blue. The next section is in red. V'dibra shotrim la'am. Now all of a sudden we have the officers coming, the shotrim. Now, we said already yesterday that this is really the Kohen speaking. And it's called shotel to teach you that just like officers are appointed, this is a Kohen who's not just born into it as a Kohen, but he gets appointed specifically to this job. Then we said, so now we're going to see today, though, that maybe the Shotrim also speak, because why else would it say Shotrim? Just to teach you that he was appointed. You could have done that in a different way, so we're going to see. Anyway, their speech is the following. Mia isha sherbana bayit chadash, who is a man who built a new house, v'lo chanacho, and he didn't yet move in. Yelech v'yashav lebeito, pen yamut b'milchama v'isha acher yichanchenu. We don't want someone else to come in his place and initiate his house, so he should go do it. He built he planted a vineyard, and he didn't yet. Now, what's chililo? Most of the commentaries think that what it means is, he didn't eat the fruits. That's obvious. But when do you eat the fruits? It's not actually just the first year. It's right for 4 years. Years number 1, 2, and 3, you can't eat fruits. Year number 4, you can eat the fruits, but you have to lechalel. You have to redeem them, just like Maaser Sheni. Bring the value of them to the temple and eat them there. So, if you didn't do the chilul yet of the 4th year, that means you have basically a 4-year exemption. We don't want someone to do that for you, so we want you to be able to do it yourself. You betrothed a woman. Remember, betrothal before marriage. You haven't yet married her. You haven't done the marriage yet. What it doesn't say here, and we'll get to this, is what if you already did move into the house, or did start eating the fruits of your vineyard, or did start marry your wife, but you're within the 1st year. Okay, we're going to have to get to that. It doesn't talk about that at all. Then it says, the shotrim then continue to speak to the people. And they say, who is scared, scared in their hearts. We don't want him to affect negatively everyone else. And then it says, and then when they did that, okay, then they finish. Fine. We're going to leave that right now. So now we're going to have to understand this whole section and who's speaking when and 3 sections and all this. And really, we're going to deal with the second section mostly today. So the details of exactly, right, classic, we're going to get into what kind of house are we talking about? What kind of building? What does build mean? What else is included in building? Or planting, or all these things. Starting with the Mishnah. So the officers speak to the nation, saying, that's the pasuk we just read. Now, what kind of house? Even if you built a house for storing your hay. Why? Because you can actually sleep on the hay. Okay? Beit habakar, even a house for animals. Now, animal house, we're going to see it gets a little bit worse each time. There's a really awful smell, but theoretically you could sleep there, right? I was thinking about in the Holocaust that people slept in all sorts of places. Beit ha'etzim, a place where you store the wood, which already is a little less likely you could really sleep there, but theoretically you could. Or beit ha'otzaro, where you stored your grain or things like that. Whether you built it, whether you bought it, whether you inherited it, or whether it was given to you as a gift. All of those things are included in this is your 1st year. You haven't. sorry, you haven't yet moved in, you get, right, this time to do. Now we get to the next one. We have the vineyard. Whether you planted it, whether you planted a vineyard, or if you planted 5 trees, and we're going to see it has to be in a particular formation. Rashi has a picture, like 1, 2, 3, 4 in a square, and then another one in the bottom, in the middle, like center below them both. The Rambam has it more, we're going to see this language later, as a tail, kind of where the 5th one is more lined up with 2 of them and not in the middle, not centered. There's a debate about how exactly this is. And then even if they're different types of trees, by the way, vineyard here is going to mean even an orchard or anything that's kind of fruit-related, fruit trees. And so even if it's 5 different types, that's still enough. Minimum vineyard is, or orchard is 5 trees. Now we're getting to the action, whether you planted it, whether you where you replant, where you take a shoot, you plant it in the ground and then kind of have it grow somewhere else. So that's like a new thing, or markiv, which is grafting. Even if you purchased it, even if you inherited it, even if it was given to you as a gift. Okay, but you haven't yet moved in, basically, and benefited from the fruits yet. Or, right, it could be you've moved in this case, it's not a house, it's that you haven't yet benefited from the fruits. We're going to have a similar thing, even though women obviously are different than property, but we're going to talk about what types of women, what types of betrothals. It doesn't matter whether she's a virgin or not a virgin, same laws apply here. Even if it's your brother's wife and he died without children, you're supposed to marry her. If you're in the battle and you hear your brother dies at war and he had no children, you go home and you take care of doing yibum to his wife. Okay, now all these categories, what do? They go out to the border, like we said, this is on the border of the country. They make this announcement. They go with everybody to the border. They hear what the Kohen has to say, and then they go back. Okay, in other words, they're supposed to be at the speech. They go. But then when he says, go home, they all go home. What do they do while everybody's out to war? Well, what you would have expected. They do the home front, right? They take care of the roads. They make sure people have water and food. They take care of all sorts of things. Now we have all sorts of cases. We're going to have 3 categories here. This was category 1. They have to go to the speech, then they go home, and then they take care of the home front. Category number 2. These are people that are similar, but not included. If you build a guard's house, a guard's booth, really, which you can't really sleep in. Achsadra is a portico, kind of a few pillars with a covering. That's not a house. Mirpeset, same thing, but on the upper level, right? A porch. Either 4 fruit trees or 5 trees, but they're not fruit trees. If you remarry someone you divorced, or almana lekohen gadol, a widow to a kohen gadol. This is interesting. It seems to imply kohen gadol goes out to war, which you would have thought kohen gadol wouldn't necessarily go out to war. I don't know if they're just bringing this because they're bringing all the other examples like this, but this isn't really. Anyway, it's something to think about. Maybe the Gemara will get to it later. I didn't look ahead. A divorcee or a chalutza to a kohen idiot. This we're used to. This is all the list of forbidden marriages. Okay, mamzeret and netina Yisrael. A mamzeret or a netina who marries a regular Yisrael, they're only allowed to marry a mamzerim or netinim like themselves. But Yisrael, the mamzer, or the reverse. She marries the mamzer or netin. Lo haya chozer. These cases, you don't go back. Okay, it was a forbidden marriage. You don't get to go home. Again, this would be the betrothal happened, but not the marriage yet. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he says, if you knock down your house because it was falling apart and you rebuilt it, that doesn't count. That's not a new house. That's your old house that you rebuilt. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, if you built a house of bricks in the Sharon, from the ground in the Sharon area, lo haya chozer. Okay, Sharon is the area where I live, the center of the country, and it's a place, if you might remember, I always remember this because it's where we live, the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippurim, there's a special prayer that we said, that the Kohen Gadol says, Shelo yiyu batehem kivrehem. Their houses don't turn into their graves. Okay, why? Because they used the ground to make their bricks, and the ground wasn't really good for making bricks, and the bricks would fall apart, and then therefore their houses would collapse. So we made the special bracha that their houses wouldn't turn into their graves. Also, it seems it was an area prone to a lot of rain and flooding, maybe the combination of the two. So anyway, this is when we had flooding on some of the streets in Renana and the houses were kind of falling apart, we all thought of this tefillah of the Kohen Gadol that would have been good had it come true. Okay. Elu she'ein zazim mimkomam. So now there's people who don't. Now we're in category number 3. We have number 1, right? Category, you go, Kohen tells you come home, you go home and you work the home front. We have 2, you don't get exempt at all. You have to go to war even though you're kind of close. Number 3, elu she'ein zazim mimkomam. Now we have the category of people who don't leave their houses at all. They don't even have to go to hear the Kohen's speech. They stay home, and we're going to learn they don't even have to work the home front. What is this? And this is not going to come from the psukim that we read before about what the Kohen says. This comes from different verses in Sefer Dvarim. Bana bayit v'chanecho. You built a house and you started living in it, but you haven't finished your first year of living in it. Nata kerem v'chililo. You have your kerem, you brought your neta ravai fruits, and now you're supposed to enjoy them, and you've already started, but you haven't had a full year. Hanoseh erusato, you marry the woman, and you're within your first year of marriage. Hakoneset yivimto, you marry your yivama. Sheneema, naki yeh lebeito shana achat. Okay, this is a pasuk which starts off with, if you marry, ki kach ish isha chadasha, you marry a new wife. Lo yetzeh batzva, this is, by the way, and not if you returned a divorcee, right? It's only if she's your new wife, and not if you remarried her. That's what we saw before. If you remarry her, it's not. Lo yetzeh b'tzava, you don't go to war. V'lo yavor alav l'chol davar, and right, you don't do anything else really for this. Naki yeh lebeito shana achat v'simach v'ishto asher lekach. You have a special mitzvah to make your wife happy for the first year, and therefore naki yeh lebeito. So now we're going to darshan these words. Naki yeh lebeito shana achat. You'll be exempt from your house for 1 year. Lebeito ze beito. From here they learn your house. Oh, this is also if you built a house, not just if you married a woman. Yihiyeh. Why does it say yihiyeh lebeito? Didn't need that extra word. Oh, that includes your kerem, zek karmo. So they basically take this and they kind of cross it with the psukim that the Kohen says to the people, and basically says this is referring to those same 3 categories, even though it really only seems to be talking about a man who got married. V'simach ishto zo ishto. Okay, that's pretty obvious. That's your wife. Asher lakach. Because it says asher lakach, that he took to be his wife. That includes the yivama, extra language. And they don't have to work the home front at all. They're fully exempt. That was all a very long mission. Now we're going to start with the Gemara. The Gemara is going to start with who speaks. And the problem with, as we saw in the psukim, who exactly is speaking. It's not actually a problem. The simple reading is the Kohen starts off the speech, the shotrim take over, and then they continue. But it's a little weird. If the shotrim were just continuing, why would it say v'yaspu shotrim? It would have just said the shotrim say the whole second and third section, and you wouldn't have had that extra word there. So Tanu Rabbanan, v'dibru shotrim, shotrim speak, the officers, yachol dvarim shel atzmam. You would have thought maybe they say it themselves. Kishu omer v'yaspu shotrim, because the third section starts with, and the officers added, harei dvarim shel atzman amor. Only that third section must be themselves speaking. So what do we do with that? Right? It sounds like I'll put up on the screen so you can see all the sections. Okay, so we have again, Nigasha Kohen, the Kohen speaks to the people. That's the first section. Dibru Shotrim, the Shotrim speak, and then V'yasfu Shotrim l'daber alam, and then they continue to speak to the people. So basically, what do we do with B'dibru Shotrim? B'divrei Mashuach Melchama katuv b'daber. They say, since it says V'yasfu Shotrim, it must be the Shotrim speak then, and they don't speak before in Pasuk Hey when it says V'dibru Shotrim. Well, the Kohen speaks, but that's weird. Haketzat. Well, then why does it say v'dibru shotrim if the shotrim aren't speaking? It's a little bit weird. So what do they answer? Kohen medaber v'shoter mashmiya. The Kohen speaks, and the officers are their microphone. Remember, we had that whole story the other day with the mitorgaman, the emorah, the one who is the microphone of the teacher, of the rabbi. Here also, the Kohen speaks, but he's speaking to the whole nation. He needs people to spread his word. That's the officers. So now they say, Tanechada, there's one braita that says Kohen medaber v'shoter mashmiya. The Kohen speaks and the shoter announces it. Tanya Idach, another bright, says Kohen medaber v'Kohen mashmiya. The Kohen speaks and the Kohen projects his voice. Whether that means other Kohanim do it, it's not so clear. But basically, he does everything. V'Tanya Idach, and there's a third bright that says Shoter medaber v'Shoter mashmiya. The officer speaks and the officer projects. So, Rabbi Haketzad, Rabbi says, how do we deal with these three contradictory brightot? To which you can probably figure this out already. They're not contradictory at all. Mi vinigash va'ad vidibro, okay, from vinigash hakohen v'diber la'am, section 1, that's all in blue, until the word vidibru in pasuk, in the fifth verse here, vidibru shotrim la'am. From there to there, meaning all the blue letters here, kohen medaber v'kohen mashmiya. That's the Kohen speaking and the Kohen projecting. That's why it says vinigash hakohen, he speaks to the people. Mi vidibru va'ad v'yasfu. Section number 2, which is all in red, about who's the man who goes to build a house and built a vineyard, planted a vineyard and betrothed a woman. That Kohen medaber v'shoter mashmiya. The Kohen speaks and the shoter is the projector. V'yasfu ba'elach, the very last section, shoter medaber v'shoter mashmiya. That's said exclusively by the shoter. Whoever's scared should go home so as not to scare anybody else. Okay, that's how we finally resolve the confusion in the psukim. So now we're going to get to what we learned in the Mishnah, but classic Midrash Halacha. We're going to see where do we get it in the psukim of which types of houses, what type of building, etc. Tanu Rabbanan, asher bana, asher bana. It's only someone who built. It says in the pasuk, who built a house. How do you know? Lakach yarash v'nitada b'matana minayin. Like the Mishnah said, how do you know if you buy it, if you inherit it, it was given to you as a gift, you also, and you haven't yet lived in it, you get to go back home. Talmud lomar. Mi ha'ish. Could have just said, who is the one? Why does it say who is the man? The man must include something else. Includes other ways you got this house. Asher bana bayit. So in the other bayit, that sounds like a house only. Minayin l'rabot beit hateven, beit habakar, beit ha'itzimu, beit ha'otzarot. All those other places we said that you could potentially sleep in. Storage houses for the most part. How do you know you get to stay back? Talmud lomar asher bana mikol makom. Because it says asher bana, that you built, unclear exactly where they get it from these words, but it could have been written asher bayit bana, that a house he built, rather than that he built a house. Again, in English, I don't know, it's hard to know exactly where they got it. But again, world of drashot, all things are kind of allowed. So poetic license. So asher bana includes anyway. Now remember these drashot because we're going to do the exact same thing by the vineyard. So once we're including, why don't we include the other things also, the guard's booth and the portico and the porch? Talmud lamal bayit. No, well, it does say house. It has to be like a house. In what way? What makes a house unique? Ma bayit hara'oi l'dira. It has to be a place that you could potentially live. Now we get to a dissenting opinion that we didn't see in the Mishnah, and remember him because we're going to come back to him at the end of today's daf. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer bayit kimashma'o. He says, no, bayit means house. All those other things you included, the storage areas, they don't count. You don't get to go back for more because of those. Now we get to another drasha, lo chanach v'lo chanacho. No, it doesn't say in the pasuk lo chanach v'lo chanacho. It says in the pasuk lo chanacho, which means you didn't start living in it. Okay, chanacho instead of just chanach. Chanach is the verb. Chanacho is the verb and the location, right? It. We're adding the it. So lo chanacho, prat legazlan. Why it specifically? What does that come to do? It comes to exclude. What does it exclude? If you stole it. If you steal a house, you can't say, oh, I need a year to live in my new house that I just stole. You think that's kind of obvious. And in fact, not only do we think it's kind of obvious, but now they're going to say the fact that they needed drasha for this, sounds like this Breita doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, because Rabbi Yossi Aglili has a different reason to say a gazlan would not be included in this, a robber. Rabbi Yossi Aglili said, now, what does it mean? The soft of heart. This is the last part they say, which is if you're scared, right, you can go back for more. Now, why would you be scared here? Who's scared of war? Who's the most scared? This is someone who's scared. We now just turn to Amud Bet. This is someone who's scared because they have sins, right? You're the most scared because you figure God's going to punish you. So it's like when you're talking in class and then the teacher starts saying to someone and you assume she's talking to you because, you were the one talking, you feel guilty. So you're assuming that you're the one who's going to get killed in war because of the avirot. So that means that a gazlan would be excluded, a robber would be excluded for other reasons. So you wouldn't need a special drasha to exclude the gazlan. So it sounds like this bright doesn't go like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, to which the Gemara says, well, no. Afilu tema Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you could explain it according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This is a little hard for us to understand, but if you did shuva and you felt bad that you stole this house and you paid the money for it, now it's a little strange. If you really felt bad, you would give the house back. But let's say someone stole my house. I moved into another house. I bought another house already. I'm already comfortable there. And now the guy feels bad, does shuva, says, I'll return you the money and gives me the money back. I don't really need the house because I'm already living somewhere else. Again, a little hard to understand, but let's just assume. So theoretically, they could have done shuva and given all the money back. So then you wouldn't be worried about going to war because you've dealt with your sin, but you still wouldn't get your year because you're a thief, okay? And that's the exclusion of being a thief. Well, then, actually, if you really bought it fair and square at this point and dealt with your sin, seems like you really should be able to go home because it's a new house for you. You purchased it, you paid the money for it, to which they answer no. You got to it in a very strange way. You stole it. We're not going to give you this exemption from war because you stole a house. So even though you might have rectified the situation, but still. Now we're going to do the exact same thing we did here, which is bring a braita, which learns it all from the psukim. And in the same kind of way. Tanu Rabbanan, asher nata, ein li ela nata, lakach v'yarash v'nitan lo b'matana minayin. It says, someone who planted a vineyard. How do you get, if I inherited it, bought it, got it as a gift? Talmud lamal, umi ha'ish. Again, it says, and who is the man who planted a vineyard? Ein li ela, asher nata kerem, ein li ela kerem. Minayin l'rabot chamisha. In other words, again, it says, a vineyard. How do you know chamisha ilanei ma'achal? But once you have 5 trees, that's already considered, right, going to be included. Va'afilu mishar minim, even if they're 5 different types of trees, which is again the halacha we saw in the Mishnah. Where do we get it from? Talmud lamal asher nata, that you planted. So again, how exactly they get it, but it's the same language. That you planted is going to include other things as well. So how far do we take that? Maybe we'll take it even to 4. Maybe we'll take it even to non-fruit trees. Talmud lamal kerem. No, it has to be like a kerem, which can be eaten and is a certain amount. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, again, the dissenting opinion, kerem kemashmo. It's only a kerem, it's not anything else. So he disagrees with the 5 trees and the even if they're different types, right? He'll say, no, can't be. Lo chilel, velo chilelo. Again, it says velo chilelo. And he didn't, right, do the redemption on the fruits of this vineyard. So again, it's an exclusionary term because it says chanacho rather than chilelo rather than chilel. Could have just said simply chilel without the vavin. This comes to exclude someone who does the grafting or the forgot the word, but taking the shoot and planting it in the ground, replanting. So now they say, okay, now you might already be paying attention, hopefully. What do you notice? This said, not if you're a mavlich, not if you're a markiv. But wait, Hanantnan, our Mishnah says, and this braita says, you don't get to go home if you did those actions. But we learned in our Mishnah, our Mishnah explicitly states the opposite, which is you do get to go home. So now we have this big contradiction, which is going to take us for a lot of our daf, the rest of our daf, between, and you can look at it in the chart, between the Mishnah and the braita. The braita says, Mavrich Markiv does not get to go home. And the Mishnah says Mavrich Markiv gets to go home. So Amar Rabbi Zeir, Amar Rabbi Chisda, first answer, we're going to have 2 resolutions to this. Lo kasher, kam b'harkavat isul, kam b'harkavat heter. If you grafted it in a forbidden manner, now this is exactly like the previous sugya, which was, if you stole it, you don't get to. If you grafted it in a way that's forbidden, because there's ways that you can't graft things that are forbidden, then no. But if you grafted it in a permitted way, then you can go home. So now they want to know, hi harkavat heter hechidami, what's the case? And we're going to suggest 2 possibilities and say neither one works. And then we're going to bring 2 answers to this question, okay? And even within the first answer, we're going to get off on a bit of a tangent. Okay, so let's read. What does it mean to graft it in a permitted manner? If we mean take a young shoot and graft it with another young shoot, well, why would it be exempt? It's not exempt. What's the whole issue of being exempt? You're exempt because you planted something new. Now here you took something that was still new and it was already exempt because, right, you're already exempt from war because it's new. Just because you grafted it with something else new, that's not going to give you any more exemption. You're already exempt because of the new one, right? That's what we're going to say. In other words, when you graft, you take the main one and then you graft onto it another branch. So the main one was already permitted because it was young. You're already permitted to go back to war because of it. So it can't be that because you're permitted for other reasons. You wouldn't need to say because you grafted it. It would be permitted because you planted it beforehand. If you want to say maybe you took a young shoot and grafted it onto this older shoot, where the older shoot was the base, and then you turn the older shoot basically into a young shoot by grafting it, well, that's not the case. Because Rabbi Avahu says, if you grafted a young shoot onto an old shoot, batla yalda biskena, because the main one is the old one, the young one is canceled to the main one. And ein badin orla, it doesn't have laws of orla, which means basically if once you don't have din of orla and neta revai, which is the fourth year, this whole law wouldn't apply to you because it's treated like an old tree. So the fact that you've grafted something young on doesn't change its status. So that wouldn't help you. So Ella Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Lo Olam Yalda B'Yalda. So first answer is, after the question, we don't know which one really makes any sense. We're trying to figure out what is this harkavat teter that they talked about that would be explaining our Mishnah. That must be Yalda B'Yalda, a young shoot with a young shoot. Ukigon, but it would be a particular case. You planted the first one just to cover a breach in a fence. That's the siag, or you planted it for its wood. Okay, and therefore, ditnan hanotel siag v'lekorot patur mina orla. If you planted for siag and korot, it's exempt from orla. Okay, because you didn't plant it for the fruits. You don't want the fruits. You really want it to block your fence or for the wood, which means then you're not planning to eat the trees. Then it doesn't have orla. But if you now graft another tree onto it, then, right, this isn't kilaim, by the way, because we're talking about the same type. Kilaim is different types, okay? So now we'll get to kilaim soon. But because of that, okay, so now what's the issue? So now, now they want to know, so what happens? You graft on this new branch onto your old one. Your old one was meant for, not for fruits, but now that you grafted this new one, it's meant for fruits. And that's why now it's going to be forbidden. You're going to have that year, meaning not forbidden. It's now going to be considered, this is harkavat teter. It's permitted to do, and you're going to be allowed to go back for more because now you have this new thing that's meant for fruits that it wasn't meant for fruits to begin with. To which the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Why isn't this like the other case that we just said? We said when you put it on an old, right, when you graft it onto an old shoot, well, the new one is nullified to the old one. But in this case, you have one that was meant, the main one was meant for non-fruit. And now you grafted this new one on. Why don't we just say it's canceled to the one that's non-fruit and it's still a non-fruit, in which case this wouldn't give you any sort of exemption. So they say no, because there's a big difference between an old one and, okay, for all of those who are old, maybe, or think yourself as old, you can relate to this. You might want to be young again, but you can't get yourself young, right? Once you're an old tree, you can't turn yourself back in years. But if you change your mind about this tree and you don't want it anymore for your breach in your fence, but you want to eat the fruits, of course you can change that. Because it was meant originally for fruits anyway, right? Any tree is. Just like if you have a tree that pops up. I had this once, I had a shesek tree. I didn't even know how to translate that into English, but most people out of Israel don't even know what a shesek is, but it's a shesek tree just grew in my backyard. Now, I didn't plant it, but it doesn't make a difference if I planted it. It has fruits and it's chayav in orla. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah. By the way, I forgot to point out, this Mishnah on the tail is siagu lekorot, by the way, is the first Mishnah in Orla, so it's just good to know. Good basic information. So now they say, why don't you, instead of bringing that answer of harkavat teter, why don't you just bring an answer, forget about saying it was harkavat teter, harkavat isur, why don't you just say it was a kerem of shnei shutafim? Why don't you say it was of two peoples, and this one goes back for his, and that one goes back for his? So Amar Papa, the fact that he didn't bring that as a suggestion, Zot Omer teaches you some other halacha entirely, which is kerem shel shnei shutavim ein chozrim alav me'erchei milchama. If we jointly own a kerem, since I don't fully own it, I don't get to go home. You don't get to go home, I don't get to go home because it's not fully mine. Umay shnami chamisha, now they make an interesting comparison. Why is this different from chamisha achim umet echad mehem b'milchama dekulam chozrim? If a brother dies in war and he has no children, and he has 5 brothers, all 5 brothers get to go back from war, even though, right, she's kind of shared between all of them. I mean, it's different, obviously, and that's what they're going to say. But they all go, even though only one of them is going to do yibum. So why, if we jointly own the vineyard, do we not get to go home? There, each one theoretically could become the husband. She's considered the wife of any one of them. If you remember, also so there's this halacha of zika. She's connected to each of them until one of them marries her. But but if we jointly share this, the kerem does not fully belong to any one of us. So it's not a good comparison. Okay, second answer to this question of what is harkavat hatel? Okay, what could this be? Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar b'mavlich ilan b'yarak. Here we get into the kilayim thing. If you take an ilan, a tree, and you bring a vegetable and graft it onto it, then now, some people say this is mutar, some people say it's asur. So harkavat hater could be this if you hold by Haitanu de Tanya holds by this Tanu who says Amavrich ilam biyara. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel matir mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamde ish kfar Akko. He permits this. So basically, harkavat hater could be putting a vegetable shoot onto grafting it onto this fruit tree, and that could be what we're talking about. Okay, that was all. If you remember this contradiction, Mishnah Braita. The Braita said you don't get to go home if you did the mavrich or markiv. And the Mishnah said you can. So we suggested maybe when it said you can't, it's when you did it in a forbidden manner, like kilayim kind of way. And this would be a permitted matter. What would be permitted? We had a whole struggle with figuring that out. We brought 2 possible answers. Now we're going to bring a second answer, which is a much simpler answer. Ti'ata Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Dimi comes, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Hamane Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Much simpler. Just say the Braita, which doesn't allow you to go home for this, is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Remember him? Lo amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov hatam kerem kemashmo. Didn't he say take the word kerem literally? Only a kerem, not something that's like a kerem. So hachanami nata kemashmo. Likewise here, it says when you plant and not markiv, mavrich, any of the grafting or any of these, right? Replanting your shoot. That's not planting. And then, right? Note'im mavrich markiv lo, and that would be a much simpler answer. The Mishnah doesn't follow his opinion, and the Braita does. And there we have a much simpler answer. Since we quoted Rav Dimi, who quoted Rabbi Yochanan, who explained the Braita in the way of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we're now going to quote a number of statements, some that Rav Dimi passes down, some that Rabbi Yitzchak passes down, of statements that Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. They're all going to have a similar theme, not like ours, but a similar theme that things sometimes appear to be a particular way, even though they're definitely not that way. And because of appearance, we're going to change the halacha. Okay, sometimes l'chumra, sometimes even l'kula. Very interesting. Like this is all like marit ayin, the way it looks. So ki'ata Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Yada pchuta mitefach. This is not a child who's less than a tefach high. This means a young shoot, a yada, like we called before. If you have shoots in your vine that are lower than a tefach, they're very, very low down, and they're growing fruits. Hayevet ba'orla kol shnoteha. If it always grows low, you're always obligated in orla. You can never eat those fruits. It's a crazy halacha. Because it always looks young. It always looks like it's 1 year old. So if people see you eating those fruits, they're going to think you're eating orla fruits, and that's a problem. As I mentioned before, we're going to talk about this. And only if it's in the formation of 2 opposite 2 and then 1 at the bottom. And obviously if there's more than that, but at least like that. Aval. But if you have an entire vineyard that's low, then everybody knows your vineyard is just low, and then they know, and then it's not an issue. It's only if it's like a small area that word wouldn't get out, then people would see you eating and think that you're eating orla. Second halacha. You're within 4 cubits of a dead person. You can't say kriyat shema. This is also why you don't want where you see that in the cemetery, because it's making fun of the mate that they can't keep the mitzvah. This is a little different, but it's about the way it looks, because really the mate isn't alive and doesn't know, oh, I can't keep mitzvot anymore, right? But it just doesn't look nice. You're walking in a cemetery where you're among dead people who can't do mitzvot, and you're kind of bragging, oh, I'm doing mitzvot. I'm Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. This is a very interesting one. A stepsister who grows up among the brothers, her stepbrothers, can't marry them because she looks like their sister. But Vilohi, we don't actually hold like this opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov because everybody knows that she's the stepsister and therefore it's not an issue. But Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Leket shecha u'peah shasam begolin. You're a poor person who gathered your leket shecha and peah from other people, and now you put in a big pile. You're not obligated in maaser because it's not yours, right? And it's patur. All this maaser ani, all the gifts for the poor are exempt. However, if you made a pile, you now have to give maaser on them. Let's say I'm collecting for the winter, and I collected all the stuff that I collected as a poor person, which I'm allowed to do, and I put it in a big pile. It looks like this came from my field, and therefore I'd have to take maaser. Amar Ula, but again, Ula comes and says, well, lo amaran ela b'sadeh. It's only if I made a big pile in the field. But by ear, if I'm in the city, kali ilay the milt, everybody knows it's not mine. I didn't make it. I didn't get it from my field, and it's okay. Last one for today. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Yalda p'huta mitefach eina mekadeshet et hazra'im. If you have a very low vineyard, now here's the leniency. Since it doesn't look like a vine because it's so low, you're actually exempt from kilei kerem if it grows together with another shoot from crops. Now, there's a big debate here. What crops are we talking about? Is it even deoraita crops, things that would be kilayim on a Torah level or only on a rabbinic level? Whole debate about what exactly is Torah level kilei kerem. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all the details, but it could be even on Torah law, it could be only on rabbinic law. This is not kilayim. But same distinction we made before. If your entire vine is very low, then we're going to treat it like a real vine, and you will have kilei kerem. It's only if it's a very small part, like 2 against 2, with this zanav coming out, with this, fifth, this on the side there, then we'll say this is unique to this area, and we can treat this area as if it's really not a vine. And therefore there's no isur, there's no forbidden of mixing your crops together. But right, if it's your whole vine, then everybody knows that it is, and then you have to be more strict. So in many of the cases, we were strict the way it looked, based on the way it looked. In this case, we're actually lenient based on the way it looked, which is just interesting to see how much they take into consideration what things look like. Okay, I know we're late, but quick summary. We started with the Aaron going out to war with them. We moved on to the speech, the part of the speech about who gets to go home. We talked about 3 categories of people. Some can't go home at all because it doesn't count as house, vineyard, marriage. Then the people who are in the in-between stage, they're about to do something, they haven't yet done it. They get to go home, but they had to go out and hear the speech and come back and then work on the home front. Then we had people who were already in their first year of living in the house, vine, enjoying the fruits, or the wife, and they get to stay home entirely. They don't even have to work the home front. We had a whole thing about who talks in which section and who kind of announces it, who's the loudspeaker. Then we had all the verses and how they proved the halachot in the Mishnah. We saw Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov who disagreed and had a much more narrow explanation of all these things. Then we got into this contradiction about the habracha and harkava, about the grafting and the replanting the shoots. And then we said, right, we had 2 possible answers. Within the first answer, we had 2 possible answers to a question we had within that. And then we got back to, because the last answer was given by Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we ended up with a whole bunch of statements Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And those were all in this category of things appearing a particular way, and we actually rule by the way it looks and not by the way it actually is. Just a lot of food for thought. Interesting that halacha takes that into consideration. Have a great day, everybody.